the Illinois Soybean Growers webinar series today. Today's discussion brings together a panel of experts from Illinois Soybean Association, industry, and academia to reflect on what we've seen so far this spring and explore key challenges and successes from the field, and then go ahead and take a look at what farmers can expect for the rest of the growing season. We'll also take a closer look at how evolving state and federal policies are shaping farm management decisions this year. Our goal is to share timely insights, answer your questions, and provide useful takeaways you can apply to your operation. So we're going to get started by letting the panelists introduce themselves. And then I will just remind everyone that there is a Q&A feature in Zoom, and you can go ahead and put questions in the Q&A feature at any time. So that said, after that really awkward introduction, I apologize, everyone. Matt, let's start with you. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself real fast?
Sure. I'm Matt Montgomery. I'm agronomy education lead at Bex and formerly University Extension. And if you think about the kind of things that Extension does, that's kind of what this position does, just to give you kind of an idea. And I serve in kind of the central, west central part of the state of Illinois.
Just a quick one sentence. Who is Bex for those that don't know who Bex Hybrids is?
Yeah, kind of a Midwest seed company, headquartered out of Atlanta, Indiana. And so it kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of the footprint.
Excellent. Dr. Sider, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Nick Sider. I'm a field crop entomologist at University of Illinois. Based in Champaign. We work all throughout the state. Yeah, and I work on corn, soybean, a wide variety of different insect management issues.
Excellent. And we won't ask to explain what the University of Illinois is. I know we're all very aware. Drew, do you want to go next?
Sure. Name's Drew Harmon. I'm the technical agronomist for the Midwest for Valent Biosciences. I provide technical support and training for the biostimulant sales team, and I facilitate market development trials within the Midwest, mainly CROs, land grant extension, and retailers. To continue on the train as to who we are as a company, I'd say Valent Biosciences, we focus on products like biostimulants and beneficial microbes, which are tools that can help crops handle stress better, use nutrients more efficiently, and stay healthy throughout the growing season. I'd say what's nice about Valent Biosciences is that we are 100% focused on R&D and biology. So everything that we do is backed by a considerable amount of science and field research.
Excellent. Thank you, Drew. And last but not least, Stephanie, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Stephanie Porter, and I am the outreach agronomist and certified crop advisor here at the Illinois Soybean Association. Previously, I've headed up and currently the outreach team, which includes Kelsey Litchfield, Lauren Hill, Connie Copley here at ISA, doing all things field advisor. Also serve as, as Matt said previously, just doing a lot of extension work here. So answering questions, providing field assistance. I do field visits, and now I'm all in on our on-farm trialing. So we currently have several plots all over the state. And so I've been attempting to evaluate those recently and see what's going on around the state.
Excellent. And so I thank you for introducing you guys, and thank you all of you for being on the panel discussion today to help our farmers just kind of talk about what this season looks like. And so when people registered, they got the opportunity to submit some questions. So we're going to just start out there. Matt, just kind of a broad question. Based on your work with Illinois farmers this spring, what are some major themes and issues you've been hearing about from the field?
Yeah, I'd say one major issue is just the diversity of the state of Illinois when it comes to crop planting progress. You can go to the north and you can see actually some real early progress. And then if you have any friends down in southern Illinois, you know that they're still battling and trying to get a crop wrapped up down there. So it's been a pretty rough spring for them. The area of the world that I serve in is kind of a microcosm of that. We're right on that place where it begins to divide off. You could go to the northwest portion of where I am and see that kind of progress that you see in the northern part of the state. And you could go in the southern area and see that real struggle. I think some other things that have come to mind. That I think also a struggle on trying to get weeds under control this year. That's been a real battle for growers. I think there are some reasons for that. And I think this is kind of just broadly speaking, there's a growing concern over the amount of rainfall and humidity that we have that we're kind of setting up the inertia that probably stokes up an environment that increases our disease potential. And so a lot of questions being asked about foliar disease in various crops.
I definitely have heard the same stories about, especially down south, where guys are they're
Yeah.
not even planted yet, and
Yeah.
it's getting to be a big problem. You know, your comments about the humidity and rainfall, that leads us really nicely into a question for Dr. Sider. From kind of, I guess, an entomology perspective, what insect pressures have you heard about this spring? And then maybe you could comment on how that humidity, rainfall, and temperature combination might be influencing insect pressures for our farmers.
Yeah, absolutely. And the most noteworthy thing I've seen so far was actually something Matt brought to my attention a couple weeks ago was a grape calaspis, some fields in kind of central Illinois. Some pretty severe injury. In fact, we walked one that was the worst. I know it was the worst I've ever seen, and I think it might be the worst calaspis field that Matt has seen as well, or one of them. And that's something that jumps out at us, these kind of irregular intervals, I think the last time we really saw it at scale was, maybe 2018, I think was the year. It has a tendency to come out so sporadically that we often don't know what to do about it, and then it'll disappear for a while again. In terms of the weather conditions, a little bit of a mixed bag. I think we'll talk some about delayed planting and that kind of thing. That does alter the spectrum of insect pests that you are likely to see. Or down in southern Illinois, we're not going to talk about corn rootworm very much. When you delay planting like that, it really sort of reduces the risk of that insect. But you do start to see more defoliators and things like that later on in the season, in many cases when planting date is delayed, stink bugs as well. Yeah, and then with the sort of mild winter that we saw, the big effect of that often is on some of our migratory pests, which might arrive a little bit earlier, and then some things like bean leaf beetles and stink bugs that overwinter as an adult. Often you see less overwintering mortality when you have that situation.
I appreciate that, Nick, and I think one thing I have heard a lot about is how is the mild winter impacting pests this year, and I think we're going to dive into that a little bit later and talk maybe how can we address that as farmers and what can we do. We can't control the weather, but maybe we can address some of our decision making in the field to help address those pest problems. Drew, just shifting to you, do you want to talk a little bit about biological or biostimulant tools that farmers are starting to adopt this season? And how are these performing under kind of these weird weather conditions or I won't say weird, odd, different weather conditions that we've seen this year? Do you want to comment on that a little bit, Forrester?
Sure. And I think it's a mixture of a few things, in a spring like this, with saturated soil, in my opinion, and, late plantings, a lot of growers I talk to aren't really in the mindset of chasing yield anymore, but in the mindset of protecting it. So from talking with growers, I've seen a lot of growers looking to apply like organic acids or seaweed extracts, especially since we've been so saturated. It can help, increase our rooting and our root hairs. And then another one I've heard people talk about, especially with all the replants that have been happening this year, is meristem's hopper throttle. Trying to get the plant up and going faster now that there's a shortened window. And so far, we have been seeing a fair amount of excess with that. We are getting increasing roost biomass and increase early season vigor now that we're going to start going into the flowering. So I think the time will tell us whether or not that will help us get some more pods on the plant this year.
Always like to get more pods on the plant, so that I like that. Stephanie, what are some key concerns Illinois Soybean Association has been hearing from growers this spring, and how is ISA responding, providing support? Can you comment a little bit on what ISA is doing?
Sure. So I think I'll try to add on a little bit to everything that everybody just said, because I think it's everything that I was just thinking. The weather has just been horrendous this year. I think that's been the key that's been really holding us back across the state, obviously. And to comment, we've been really cool early on. In some places, too much rain to the south. To the north, we're too dry. We've had issues with residuals not working or needing more rain to be activated in the north, actually having drought symptoms to the north currently. And to the south, we have one plot that's just getting planted tomorrow, if that gives you an idea, down south. So we have a lot of weed pressure, as Matt said. We also have a lot of volunteer corn. I actually saw some volunteer corn being sprayed on the way up here to Bloomington today. And I think the main issue has been the wind. And that was not just the wind event we just had, where we had some lodging of corn and tornadoes. We had a plot that almost got taken out by a tornado, by the way, in Petersburg. And we also started finding grape collapse beetles, Nick, there. So they are maybe not feeding below now, but they're now starting to feed above. But we only found one to add to that. And now we add in heat stress. And as Matt commented on, a lot of people are starting to say, oh my gosh, I think we have tar spot. It's spotted. But if we go by the disease cycle at this point in time, and the Crop Protection Network actually has a great new forecasting tool, which I tried out yesterday, and said, you know, if I'm thinking about diseases right now, and if we have a lot of humidity, the ones most likely that if it stays hot, that I'm concerned about would be frog-eye leaf spot and soybeans. Southern rust is moving up from the south currently. We can watch it as the counties turn red to the south, and gray leaf spot is always a concern. Although it's not quite, doesn't like as much heat normally. But those are things that are on my radar, and we utilize Field Advisor to get a lot of the word out, whether that be crop reports, which if you want to know more about, for example, the grape collapses, Nick Sider's crop report is on fieldadvisor.org. We also have podcasts hosted by Kelsey Litchfield with soy envoys like Matt. And then we also do webinars like this and blogs with our soy envoys and crop reports with U of I Extension.
I love it. I appreciate you sharing kind of what ISA is doing specifically, Stephanie. Unfortunately, it looks like we had a little bit of technical difficulties with Matt, but I'm sure we're going to get him back on here in a minute. I do want to transition. I'll remind everyone that the Q&A, you can put questions there, and I do want to transition to some of those questions that we're having come in or that we had submitted ahead of time. But before we do that, I heard a trend across everyone, which is kind of about replant. And one of the conversations I've heard from a lot of folks this year, especially down south, but maybe even into central Illinois, is what are your thoughts about replant? So, I mean, I'll leave this open to the full panel, but what are the considerations in a replant area versus a non, in terms of pest control, in terms of management, but also maybe, I don't know, Stephanie, maybe this is a good question for you, or anyone that wants to jump in, but how do you decide when to replant and when to not? You want to comment a little bit on those? When's the cutoff date? What are the thoughts there? Stephanie, do you want to lead off on that, or?
Sure, I'll try to tackle it. I will start with soybeans because that's my favorite crop, right? So from a soybean standpoint, we were set up early with not just the weather as a possible issue, but last fall we had very dry conditions, and that can affect seed quality. So the first thing that we started to alert people of is that, look at your germination on your seed box. That definitely could have been a factor. If you were like us and a lot of other farmers in Illinois, you like to plant early, and soil type comes in, but we've really struggled with planting early personally. And so we've really bumped up our pops, and it was a good thing this year, not only with the weather, but also with the seed germination issue possibly as a factor going into it. A lot of people in Illinois like to use a full seed treatment. And so that just, kind of helps with population. But overall, I would say from a population standpoint, on average in central Illinois, people are around 140 to 120, as low as 120 starting population. And then to the north, they may go a little higher. To the south, they go a little higher. And then on average, I'll tell you that we have taken plant populations on at least 7 plots across central Illinois, and they're all around 100,000. And that's where we like it to be around, some as low as 70, say, if you look at some of the Beck's work. If you look at U of I's work, around 100,000. And I think that's about where we are so far just in central Illinois. And I haven't even taken plant populations down to the south. I have my cousin who is in Montgomery County who just planted not too long ago. His was around 100,000 as well. So that's where we like it to be. When it starts getting lower, though, you have to worry about people like my brother that worry about that big thick stem and it being very difficult to harvest and maybe slower to harvest. And so that is an issue when you start getting into those low populations. If Matt would hop on, I'd have him talk to corn, but if anybody wants to pop back on and talk about corn, we're obviously getting too late in the season. Corn populations overall, from what the corn stands I've seen, look good across the state. A lot of the corn I feel like was planted later, not necessarily. And so those populations, I would say, run around 32 lowered to the south, 24,000 to the south, and maybe a little higher in some places. And it definitely depends upon the hybrid population, but date also makes a factor. And a lot of people, obviously, we're really late in the game now, are focused on maybe switching to beans or planting beans. There's been a lot of questions about that. And so the other thing recently, people are taking corn populations because there could have possibly been some grain snap with this, especially on the earlier April planted corn. So people are out looking. Make sure you're aware of that and see how your plant populations go there.
I appreciate that. Nick, do you want to comment on in a replant situation, how does that impact insect pressure? Is there a different management thoughts there?
Well, the one thing I'll mention, and it's getting a little bit late in the season for this, but you usually, if it's an insect that drove that replant, you want to make sure that it's gone. At June 24th, you probably can't wait anymore. So you're going to hope that it's gone rather than that. And when you get later in the season, again, it does, especially when if it's beans, if they stay green a little bit longer than all the beans around it, you can kind of become sort of a sink for the mobile pests that are still out there. I'm thinking stink bugs and bean leaf beetles in particular. With corn, you can also become a sink for corn rootworm beetles if you happen to be the latest cornfield out there. If you're the last cornfield in an area to be pollinating, that really draws those beetles in, and that's not necessarily going to be a problem this year for you. Takes a heck of a lot of corn rootworm adult feeding to cause any sort of an issue, levels that we don't normally see. But the following year, especially if you are in a continuous corn situation, that might be a field you want to keep an eye on for corn rootworm larvae.
Drew, Thanks, Nick. And Drew, do you have anything you want to think about when it comes to replant? What are you talking to guys about there?
For me, when I'm talking with the growers, I see it as a few things. Typically, depending on how late it gets, we're going to need to start shifting to a lower maturity group, right? Especially those in Southern Illinois, I imagine shifted to maybe a high 3 or a low 4, depending on when they got in, or maybe even less. We're going to have less time to get that vegetative growth, so probably less branching. So we have the conversation that we're going to need more main stems out there. And then sort of lastly, it's going to shift the crop growth and development later, right? So that means that we're going to be flowering typically within 3 to 4 weeks. So we're most likely going to have fewer nodes and fewer pods on a per plant basis, which again drives back to that potentially trying to get more plants out there. So if we're going to have fewer nodes, fewer pods, we need to, how I talk to them is we need to do everything we can to protect them, right? And these compressed vegetative stages means that our crops are going to they're going to have less time for uptake and redistribution of nutrients. So they're most likely going to need help. And that's where I enter the conversation, where I think certain biostimulants like organic acids, like our transit, can really help improve the uptake and redistribution, especially for certain micros like iron, manganese, things that are going to be needed for increased photosynthesis that can help sort of shoulder the load for these stressful conditions that we're going to be putting our plants into.
I appreciate that. And I like that you brought it back to some of the micronutrient challenges that we face in these fields and things like that our plants need when we're trying to grow them. Matt, I know we lost you there for a minute, just so you know. I'm glad that you were able to figure out your technical issues there and welcome back. We're just kind of discussing, I'd asked the question about replant and how to what are some decision making around replant management, maybe specifically, how do you decide when to replant and when it's a lost cause and you shouldn't replant? And we've heard from the other three panelists pretty depth, but do you want to add maybe a quick thoughts on that? When do you decide when to replant and when not? Maybe.
Yeah, I think, boy, it's a complicated question, right? My apologies again for my technical issues on this end. I think one of the things you always have to keep in mind is what the workload ahead looks like. So I know we're a little bit past this, but if we were earlier in the spring, what does the overall workload for getting a crop in the field look like? And what does that mean about where you are in the overall process? And that actually begins to kind of tweak how intensely you begin to think about a replant. And then, honestly, I think you always need to be thinking about closing stand. What do you have in that field for a final population? And you need to be looking at that and kind of making some decisions on what's going to happen with your risk level. We know that if you have really low populations, you can sometimes see those high yields come off. But also in very stressful environments, you can see the lows go exceptionally low. And so I think keeping in mind that 80,000 stand type idea, and then also keeping in mind how much other work remains on the table is actually really, really important. So I don't know that it's a real distinct black and white answer. I think it does kind of depend upon the unique situation you find yourself in, if that makes sense.
No, that does make a lot of sense. And I appreciate that, Matt. Also, no worries about technical issues. We we all experience them. So Nick, it looks like you primed some concern or more thoughts on this grape collapsis. I know I'm saying that last part wrong. Comment that you made. Do you want to share a little bit more about the insect and also maybe comment on how to scout for it and where are the hot spots in the state?
Yeah, sure. And the way you scout for it, I mean, typically you are going to see those above ground symptoms first. A lot of times it looks like a nutrient deficiency. We see a lot of P deficiency type symptoms, especially out there as those larvae are feeding on the root hairs, on the mesocotyl, on that developing root system. And then if you go and dig those plants up, the larvae, they resemble kind of superficially a white grub, but like a tiny one. They're going to be like maybe between 1/8 and 3/16 of an inch long. What's happening with that insect, the adults, which Stephanie referenced earlier, they're starting to come out now. Actually, Matt, I haven't been back to that field since last week, but I bet it's loaded up with adults now, or starting to become so. And so those adults in July will start laying their eggs primarily in legumes. And those larvae will feed for a while during this summer on those legume roots, and then they'll overwinter. They'll kind of dig down into the soil profile a little bit as a partially grown larva. The following spring, they come back up the soil profile, and at that point, they're a whole lot less picky. And so for us, just because of our rotation pattern, we see them in corn a lot more often because if you have a soybean field, generally it's corn next year, right? That's usually how that goes. They can be a tremendous pest in soybean after soybean when you have that situation. And that's when they start feeding on those developing plants. We tend to see them in areas, and it's I don't think the soil type has ever been really well characterized, but kind of lighter, siltier soil where you don't have a ton of organic matter, where you're kind of well drained, but not too well drained, not necessarily like a sand or anything like that. When you see soils that get saturated really easily, we often don't see them there in Illinois. And a lot of times when we're finding these as far as the hot spots in the state, the worst issues I have seen over the years have tended to be kind of around the Springfield area. And you hear some other pockets like that. And then within a field, a lot of times you're seeing it sort of on the tops of the hills, kind of on the upper areas. This field Matt and I walked, it was a little bit unique in that you had these spots all throughout the field. It was very heavily affected. Most of the times when I've walked a grape calaspis field, you're really looking at a relatively small part of the field, and very often kind of on the higher zones.
I was going to say, I think Matt and I have both seen our first Japanese beetle. That'll be the next thing, right? How about that?
Yep, yep. Yeah, we've seen a few of those as well.
Comment a little bit about, since you brought it up, Stephanie, comment a little bit about the Japanese beetle and what it maybe some thoughts on that.
I would say just don't get alarmed. It's one of those pests that it can be, I know to Nick's point, seasonal, patchy, but always that's why we scout, right? That's why we're out there watching. I think something to be aware of this year, just overall scouting for pests like Japanese beetles, is we have all different planting dates, right? And so that's going to be the kicker. It's not, we had a little bit of that in some areas last year as well. And so you had to be really careful, again, about some of the later planted fields where some of these pests might have not had anything else to feed on. Same with earlier crops as well, but just be cognizant of that and make sure you're aware of how much feeding. A lot of times, and not to put Nick on the spot again, but ISA is funding some research to look at some of these pests to see if they're really causing, economic injury, what thresholds, and should we be spraying? And in these times where, low prices of crops and high inputs of some of the things out there, farmers are really asking, should I be spraying these types of things? And a lot of times with Japanese beetle especially, they look a lot worse than they are, foliar damage. And I would say with corn in my all my years where I walked into a field and I was like, oh my gosh, it's just a lot of times you think that there's a lot of Japanese beetles until you get further into the field. So a lot of times they're on the edges as well. So just a couple of things to walk, get out of the truck and actually look through the whole field. Even if it's 100 out.
So I love that your comment there, walk and also get out of the truck. Don't just scout the field from the highway, huh? That's some good input. So one of the questions we kind of got from a few people was just to share, since we're on this topic of scouting, we got a question from a few people around just what are some interesting scouting stories that you've already seen this year? It doesn't have to be insect related, but it can be since we have Nick here, but maybe interesting. I know every year there's some interesting nitrogen management situations and stuff like that that come up. Do any interesting scouting situations or maybe life lessons from the scouting perspective come to mind that you guys have heard this year?
I think one that would be of recent interest would be a lot of down corn in different areas, and maybe one of the life lessons there is the real need to be patient and step away for just a bit and come back. Unfortunately, with a lot of things when it comes to different situations that we see like that in the field, you have to actually see how the crop looks given just a little bit of time. And so we did have some pretty windy events through the central part of the state that knocked the crop around just a little bit. And after a few days, so long as we're not crimped or so long as we aren't green snapped, we usually recover. And the beans seem to be early on enough that I don't think we're going to wind up with a tangled mess again. Sometimes just that discipline of taking a deep breath, stepping away, not going out to see the nightmare, and maybe taking a look at it after a few days is worth keeping in mind.
I would say, and I learn this every year, I get called to some pretty nasty stuff. I don't, some really hard field calls. And so I like to attribute it to me because I feel like sometimes I have a lot of health issues. But when I go to the doctor, we have to do a lot of tests, right, to figure out where something is. I think that sometimes agronomists are too quick to say, call it a disease. I think it's a cop out. And I think that more and more as I talk to other certified crop advisors, consultants, soy envoys, we start pulling soil samples. We're finding pH issues. The fields that I'm in are beans on beans, which I know you can do that in Southern Illinois. Me and Kelly Robertson will go back and forth. But to Nick's point, you got beans on beans, and you could have a lot of different problems in the field that could be causing that disease. And so maybe take a harder look. It could be seed quality. I'm running into that as well. That could be an issue that causes more disease. So I would say keep an open mind and make sure that your soil tests are up to par. Make sure you know what hybrid or variety you're putting out there and what type of resistance it has. And be aware of resistance, not only weeds, but also diseases like Phytophthora as well.
Sure. On my end, one, it was just from up above, the NDVI was sort of all over the charts, and we sort of traced it back to just application, not error per se, but all the humidity that was in the air was most likely changing the specific density of dry fertilizer. And we can see basically hotspots of just the have and the have nots. Some got it, some didn't, and certain bands or certain strips are seeing that. And then I guess I would say the horror story. I know this is Illinois soybean, but I live on the western side of St. Louis, and when the hail came through, it sort of shredded everything, and then the wind came through right behind it. So shredded it, and then the wind took it away. So we were just seeing absolutely barren fields when 3 days ago there was a crop here. So that triggered a replant situation, obviously. I would say those are the interesting scouts that I've come across.
I haven't had
I-
anything too excited yet other than the Colaspis thing, so that's been good. Usually my time comes a little later on unless we've got
Well, I
something
don't want to
weird.
bring back bad memories, Nick, but I keep seeing this lated planted corn, and we got burned on our farm too with the aphids. And I didn't want to bring it up, but I did because it's still fresh in all our minds. And it was just another, I think, example of later planted a crop where a pest kind of popped up and burned us with certain hybrids of all different companies. And the other one I've seen bean leaf beetle late in the season on later planted. So other things to keep aware of.
Yeah.
Nick, I think we're all happy that you don't have any exciting stories yet, because
I
if you
thought so. I thought you would be. That's why I brought it up.
So I appreciate that. And I'm gonna switch over to some live questions here. One question that came in: droughty areas in northern Illinois. Real quickly, what insects, pests might farmers be watching for, and when? Spider mites, etc.
Yeah, I mean, spider mites is the big one, right, for us in Illinois. Very heavily driven by drought stress and high temperatures, which we're in right now. Good thing about spider mites, a few good rain showers will more or less make them go away. So I'm in northern Illinois today. On my way up here, I saw a couple of spots that were like, could be. I'm gonna get out of my truck and check a few of those on the way back to see if that's what's going on, or there's a lot of things that'll cause a little patch of yellowing out there. But yeah, spider mites are the one that I get concerned about, that can really cause a lot of injury. We'll see more grasshoppers certainly when it's dry. Less common for us to see that as a big economic driver of anything here in Illinois. If you got a lot of grass pasture, you might disagree with me there, but yeah, spider mites would be the one that you should keep your eye out on.
So Matt, this is a live question, and I need you to be quick, but I have to have an explanation. I'm a huge NASA fan. I was lucky enough to fly aboard the Weightless Wonder 3 years in a row, in early 2000. That's the KC-135 used to train astronauts. What it feels like to be in space. Nice set of patches behind you. So what's this guy talking about?
That's pretty interesting. Yeah, that's a good eye. Yeah, I have a whole bunch of that's the other nerdy part of Matt Montgomery. I've got a bunch of space patches behind me from a lot of the Apollo missions and early shuttle missions and that. So yeah, very good eye. A very, very good eye.
Okay, I thought maybe we were going to learn that you were also not just an Illinois farmer, but a space farmer or something like that. So,
You have to be in a lot better shape than what I am to go into space. So
so it looks like we do have a question here. I suspect not from a farmer, but from a researcher at one of our universities. But I would love if anyone wants to add some quick thoughts on this. How can we, through our research and student involvement, contribute and help Illinois farmers? Do you guys have any thoughts on that? That's kind of an open-ended question.
I think one thing to keep in mind is it's try to think about ways that you can make the research that you do really practical and applicable to growers in the state of Illinois. So all sorts of important, fun questions that we can and should ask, but then automatically think about what is the benefit I could show a grower when it comes to production. Always bear in mind, as Stephanie kind of mentioned earlier, really tight margins. A lot tougher environment to farm in. So always think about the research that you're doing. How can you apply that to make a better situation income wise for a grower? And I think what you do will be well received.
So at ISA, we have a lot of opportunities. Obviously, our board will fund research. And so we meet with a lot of researchers like Nick, for example, who's on the panel. And we get asked a lot of questions that Matt just kind of went over, and we ask our board. They're really farmers, out there. And they, they are sitting there and they want to understand the project. They want to know the research and how is it going to affect them and their neighbors. And I think that the on-farm piece is huge as well. A lot of these researchers like Nick are offering up their time and their students' time to actually go and talk to growers and be on farm and to see what's really happening out in the field. And I think thirdly, and I can go on and on about this, but lastly, I will wrap it up that Illinois is a huge state. And we have to realize that the North is not like Central Illinois, and Central Illinois and the North are not like Southern Illinois. And we are very regional, and that is huge. And everyone farms differently. And again, we just want to make sure that the research matters and can be taken back and used on the farm.
If I was just gonna add one thing, I mean, it's extremely important for us. You know, some research has shown that, you know, growers, one of the most important things that they look at to determine what they're going to do on their farm is with extension research. So it's extremely important to us to get our products into the hands of extension researchers or CROs that you feel are trusted advisors. So I would say without that leg of the triangle or of the stool, the whole model falls apart. So it's a critical part of the industry.
I love the idea of we have to have extension researchers because, you know, to help farmers, research has to be applied. As someone who did a PhD on microplots, they're great, but when you're on a 10 by 10 foot plot, that's maybe not representative of what happens in a 30 acre or 40 acre field. So I love that. So I'm going to transition a little bit. Got a couple quick questions I think we can answer fast. Nick, I'll throw this at you. How do you view insecticide inclusion in foliar applications?
We've got a project all about it with ISA. And one thing, you know, the battle we are constantly fighting is that those insecticides are very, very, very cheap, especially relative to the cost of the application, relative to the cost of usually the fungicide that it's going out with. One thing I always try to point out and try to emphasize, generally these applications are going out at R3. When we go out and scout soybeans for foliar pests, which are the ones that these are controlling at R3, beyond our Japanese beetle buddies that we talked about earlier that are, you know, probably the wimpiest pests that we see year in and year out, that it's pretty rare for them to amount to anything by themselves. We don't see a whole heck of a lot. When we talk about residual activity with insecticides, generally we're talking about something between 7, 10, maybe 14 days where you're getting like good residual control from that, particularly the pyrethroids that we're generally reaching for, which are these very cheap materials. So if you're doing this as a preventative to kill something that's coming in down the road, it's got to be like 7 to 10 days down the road, right? And most of the time when you look at these applications, we're chasing something that's not there. And if a pest does show up, it's going to show up after that material's gone anyway. So I do encourage you, you know, if you're throwing that insecticide in there, have a reason for it. You know, do some scouting, see what you've actually got out there in the field. Because much of the time, what we're chasing with those applications either doesn't exist or it's not there yet. We've walked a lot of really clean R3 soybean fields over the last couple of years.
So, Nick, I love that comment. If you put the insecticide in there, have a reason for it. I mean, I think that that's just such great agronomic advice across the board. So we have another question, and Stephanie, I know this is a topic that's shall we say near and dear to your heart. When should farmers be scouting red crown rot and for red crown rot? And are there any further updates on geography? So just so people know, Illinois Soybean is heavily invested in following and helping farmers address this issue. So Stephanie, do you want to drop in on that topic?
Yeah, and I know Matt can add a lot too. He was in the war zone, as we call it. If you go to the Crop Protection Network map, it currently has all the previous counties within the state and other states where red crown rot has been found in the last year or so. Here, I would say the symptoms would start showing up if conditions are conducive after R1, around more so maybe R3, but I've seen them as early. It just depends on the disease triangle. The disease can be actually is probably, I've been taking soil temperatures out in the field, and we're probably about the right soil temperature that this fungus spreads. It can infect, it doesn't just infect early on, it can infect all throughout the season. And so I think it's very similar. I like to compare it to sudden death syndrome. So symptoms show up after you have a big rain, and it has a toxin just like sudden death syndrome does in the base. Sudden death syndrome has a toxin that will be taken up to the plant, and that's how we see the actual symptoms of red crown rot that look very similar to other diseases like sudden death syndrome and stem canker and others, actually. So it can be heavily confused, and that's when we start to say, I think around the time usually R3 is where people start finding it, because I think they're in the sprayer a lot of times. I would like to think that they're scouting, but I think they're in the sprayer, and they start calling and saying, well, I think I have something going on here. Can you come check it out? I think, that's when you want to look at the base, make sure you see if you can see any of those red fungal structures that's very distinctive. We found out in years past, if it's dry, you may not have those fungal structures present. And so that's where we are very afraid of misdiagnosis out in the field. We've had a lot of that in years past, where they just, everything's red crown rot, or it's sudden death syndrome, I think, what's happened in the past. And so that's where we have to be very cognizant of sending it off to a disease lab to make sure what it is. And that's where I think it's been happening more so in the last couple years. And we are finding out it's pretty much more widespread than we thought.
Matt, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think like Stephanie said, I've got this feeling that we're set up at least for the kind of conditions that we need for the disease to appear. I think mid-July you might be able to start spotting some of those little chlorotic spots on the leaves. And then I think really for a lot of us, it's going to be that late July, early August period, just to put some calendar dates with some of the staging stuff that Stephanie was talking about, that we'll start spotting those little fruiting structures. Again, I think, like Stephanie said, maybe a little bit more widespread than some of us have appreciated in the past.
Awesome. And so I'm gonna transition. We did get an emailed question. I know some people maybe had some struggles with the Q&A. Please keep putting those questions in there. But we did get an emailed question. I think this is for the whole panel. What are you doing with drones, detection and spray? So what are thoughts? Drone usage for detection and spray. Anybody got a story or some insights on that?
Sure. Drones are becoming very prevalent, especially under situations right now where, I've had a lot of growers tell me that whether it's a weed control problem that they need to get onto and the soil profile just won't support the sprayer. But we've actually been looking at utilizing drones for our trials and as well as retailer on farm trials, and trying different timings. Currently we have sort of set windows as to when products can go out, and that's basically based on their application windows, right? Post-emergence, a fungicide, or on a seed treatment. But certain products might like to go out at R1 soybeans instead of at R3 soybeans. And how can we not be disruptive, but provide more tools to the growers if it will be beneficial to them? So I think they're on the rise, and they're not going away. They're not going to replace the sprayer by any means, just because of the workload and as the size of the farm keeps getting bigger. But it's certainly an interesting tool.
It's a broad question, I know, but definitely of interest. Nick, you went off mute. Do you have something to add there?
Yeah, I was just going to say I'm a little personally embarrassed that I don't have one myself yet, but we're hoping to get into that soon. But we've been actually, for a lot of the trial work with ISA that we were talking about earlier, we're using drones to get those applications out. For a research tool, it's great. The scale of it is perfect, although I've been impressed with how quickly they've been able to increase that scale. I have a lot of interest in using these as an insect scouting tool. You know, a lot of the work on developing them for scouting, there's the imagery, and then there's being able to detect stress. You know, a lot of times for us, when we detect stress from an insect, we really wanted to be out there a couple of weeks ago, right? So a lot of times maybe they detect the insect after it's done its stuff, but developing ways to use those to scout in a timely manner to where you can make a decision on an insect pest, I think that's something I'm really interested in going forward.
No, I appreciate that, and I know that that's a broad topic. How are you using drones? I love your comment, Nick, that I'm embarrassed that I don't have one yet. I think maybe there's a lot of people that feel that way. Um, so big question, and this might be help us. So we're coming up on the 10 minutes. I do want to transition to a little bit of a conversation about what guys can do next. But before we get there, we did have a great question. What pesticide use concerns should farmers have related to MAHA push in Washington, D.C.? So MAHA is Make America Healthy Again. I know I'm probably the policy oriented person on this call, but these guys want to hear from you guys. So from an industry perspective, what are you guys hearing? Matt, you went off mute, so you must be excited to answer this question.
Well, I think I'm not so sure that this is addressing the MAHA component, but I think it's a good underlying point about something we need to keep in mind in general. I've been a real big advocate of mentioning that we can lose pesticide tools in one of two ways. We can lose those tools through resistance or through regulation. And regulation is a loss of public goodwill oftentimes. And so I think, regardless of the larger discussions on MAHA, I think we all need to be very, very cognizant that we want to make sure we're using those tools in the right way as much as possible because we want to maintain public goodwill. We tend to not recover from that loss of public goodwill when a product is taken off the registry. We lose that for good. And so I think it's just a reminder for us to be super good stewards of what's really a limited toolbox that we work with now.
That's a great point, Matt. And I'll say that I talk about this topic a lot personally and my or professionally too. And I think I would just remind farmers that you live in an environment now where everything's recorded and everything's observed. And so we're already doing things right. We're already doing things based on science. So just stand confident in that and be confident in sharing why you need these products and things. We haven't got into it, but we saw the herbicide strategy from the EPA was released earlier this year. The insecticide strategy was released. It's a lot. There's just a lot there that's changing in the pesticide policy world, and we have to engage on it in a way that is in a lot of ways, I guess, positive, maybe even when it makes our lives a little bit harder as the ag community. With that, I want to spend a little bit of the end of our conversation here focusing on looking ahead and maybe some expectations and management around going into harvest. One broad question. Actually, I'll start first. Drew, we had a question about new products and technology. What should guys be paying attention to? Between now, we've talked about a lot about the challenges. What are some things that come to mind for you that guys could be adopting at this point?
For new products and technology, that's an interesting question, especially in today's saturated biostimulant market. I'm not sure if you guys have seen this. It's a biologicals landscape Venn diagram that was made by the Mixing Bowl, I believe. But they identified over 1,200 companies with a biological or biostimulant product. So as a grower myself, I can definitely understand, why that is confusing as to what there is to be used. I would say, but that being said, there are some good technologies out there and more coming on the horizon. And really the ones that I like key in on are the ones that have been vetted by some third party for their efficacy. So if I was going to give some examples, I could throw a shot across the aisle over there to Matt. I would say Meristem's hopper throttle has been stamped PFR proven, right? So you can stand behind the folks at Bex that they believe it will add value to you. Syngenta's yield on has been bio-verified by Winfield United, right? And then, for example, us here at Valent Biosciences, our flagship biostimulant Transit has been certified by the Fertilizer Institute. So if there is some confusion to growers, I would just reach out to your trusted advisors and look at trusted third party people certifications. Matters of people that have the ability to test it for the claims against or for efficacy against their claims. That's what I would say.
I love that thought, Drew. Just so everyone knows, I know we're coming up on the hour. I did want to share the QR code. If folks need CEUs for today's event, you're welcome to hit that QR code. Matt, I see you doing it. I don't know if you can get CEUs for when you were part of the panel.
I'm trying. I'm trying.
You can. It's okay. I learned a lot today, Corey.
This feels like cheating, but okay. We'll go with it. So this is a broad question, but I'll ask the whole group here. We had this asked, how do we stay profitable with increased inputs and low prices? So super broad topic, but we've all thought about it. Matt, you went off mute. Feel free.
Yeah, I think be very disciplined to pay attention to the must-dos for raising a crop. We know what those are. You know what those are. Don't let price pressure get you off of that, and have a plan for the season and be diligent and disciplined to stick with that plan, and don't let price pressure, margin pressure move you off of your plan, except in extreme situations. I think those are two critical things you've got to keep in mind to stay profitable. You can't let some of those pressures move you off the bead. You got to stay disciplined to what you know it takes to raise a crop. You got to stay disciplined to the plan that you had in place.
Stay disciplined. That's easier said than done, but I appreciate that. All right. So Nick, we've touched on this, but I'm gonna give you an opportunity going into harvest. Between now and harvest, you can make predictions. What's the biggest insect pressure concern? And you're gonna be graded on accuracy.
I hope it's not cornleaf aphid again. I hope it's not a surprise. Usually for us year in and year out, it's corn rootworm. And that's become a more kind of a regionalized within Illinois issue. Outside of that, they become really difficult to predict, even if you have weather. If we start to get 2 weeks of drought, then you could say spider mites maybe, but hopefully that doesn't happen. But yeah, if you wanted to make the safe bet, it would be corn rootworm, BT resistant corn rootworm.
Anyone care to add to that thought? Most biggest special. Oh, Stephanie disagrees with you.
No, I want to add. You said, can you add? I also know there was a question, and I know we don't have a lot of time left, but on volunteer corn, there is a lot. I've been getting questions on it on volunteer corn in soybeans, and that also can be a corn rootworm host or contribute to some of that resistance that Nick was talking about. So I just want to comment really quickly on that. I think that there's a lot out there. It might have gotten missed. You can have antagonism when the plant is under stress, if the weed's not actively growing, or if they're just in general, like we're saying right now, taller. In general, when you have that dim or that FOP, one example is clethodim, for example, in a 2,4-D type of situation, which that's a lot what's out there now with E3. You can have antagonism. So basically that dim or FOP is not working. So Some people try to increase the rate of the DEM or FOP that's taking care of that volunteer corn. In other situations, Dr. Hager said you may just have to go back over it again with just the DEM and the FOP. Or in some cases, depending on the product, always reading fall label directions, you might have to actually put on an improved adjuvant in some situations. And I think it's obviously it's a tough situation out there, and it's real.
No, I appreciate you calling that out, Stephanie. I did actually have that question earmarked to bring up because I know volunteer corn is an issue. And, at the Soybean Association, we support corn too, but not volunteer corn. So, here's a question. So we've heard a lot today from everyone about kind of the varied planting conditions, the varied weather across the state. We had a question, it was pretty broad, what growth patterns, unique pest pressures we can expect. I think we've really dived into this, but I think a core of the question that was submitted was, what can farmers expect for harvest windows to look like? So if anybody on the call can go ahead and tell us when harvest is going to happen, please share. But no, in seriousness, what are our thoughts? Are we going to be super late down south? Are we going to be late up north? Anyone want to share your thoughts on this?
Well, I just want to say, from somebody that's just planting today in the South, that's not probably their focus right now. So.
I think you run the potential, because of some of the progress up north, for it to be very tight and early. South, of course, is going to be really late, and it's going to be spread out. And honestly, central will probably be spread out, because we do have that transition area between really good progress and where stuff started to trend a little bit more like the southern part of the state. So I think some northern areas, the potential to be much tighter than maybe the southern half, or even a little bit more of that of the state of Illinois.
I think that's fair. It's an interesting thought, and it's hard to answer for sure. And Stephanie, good point that, for these guys that haven't even finished planting as of today, harvest must seem like a long way away at this point. So Drew, you mentioned biologics a few times. We got this question. I think you kind of hinted at it earlier, but I want to address it real fast. I think that there's sometimes some skepticism around the biologics market. How do we know what works and what doesn't? Can you just comment broadly for guys? How do you measure success when it comes to biologicals?
Sure. And for me, I think sort of the challenge or the biggest misconception, with some of like the vague claims out there by some of the products in the industry, is that biostimulants are a silver bullet. They're not magic, right? But how I typically go about evaluating them is just systematically from beginning to end, based on what the product type is and versus how was the product applied, right? Do we get an increase in larger root mass? Well, we can go scout that. We can dig some roots up, right? Did we get increased early vigor? Do we have an increase in NDVI, NDVRE, SPAD, something like that? Does it provide an increase in plant health later on in the season, right? Did it put on more pods? If all things are considered equal, there's no yield compensation, then increase like 1 or 2 more pods per plant is a significant yield increase, right? So there's things like that we can track. Some of the things that I've been liking doing in the past couple of years is testing bricks around R3, right? Are the products that we applied, are we producing and moving more sugars to the seed? Did we produce a higher test weight, and by in doing so producing bigger, denser seed, right? And then all of those things stack up. It's like a death by 1,000 cuts, and it all comes back to the yield monitor. And because ultimately we do have to provide an increase in ROI to us and to the grower, right, in order to be successful.
I love that. That's a great way to end today's conversation. We have to provide an ROI to the grower, at least. And so I love that. So with that, I'll thank all our panelists for sharing their insights, and to everyone who has joined us today. We appreciate your time and engagement, and we hope that the discussion provided valuable information as you navigate the rest of the 2025 growing season. Before you go, please don't forget to use the QR code, which I just turned off. You can tell I wrote this script ahead of time here. Sorry, we'll put it back on. There's the QR code again. To receive your CEUs, as we saw that exampled by Matt earlier. Additionally, if you're not already a member, we encourage you to become an Illinois soybean grower member. It's a great way to stay informed, connected, and engaged in shaping the future of agriculture in our state. Finally, please be sure to join us again in July for our next webinar, which will, you know what, it is July. In July for our next webinar, which will be announced soon. Thanks again and have a safe and successful season.